and I am going to welcome to the stage our program specialist for science, Kelli Quan-Martin. Please give her a hand. As you may know, today is going to be heavily focused on the next generation science standards, and Kelli is going to give us an introduction.
Awesome. I was kind of worried about how do I get the attention of 500 plus people in a room, because the hand raising thing only goes so far, but apparently it works on a crowd this size too. So this will be really a test of my classroom management strategies today, because I'm a firm believer that good teacher professional development models good teaching strategies, but I've never had an experience of this size. So we're going to be testing out some things today. So good morning. As Anna mentioned before I walked up on the stage, today you're getting an introduction to the next generation science standards. Some of you, I think, have been kind of eager to get started in science and wondering what we're up to in the district. Some of you are like, we could wait a little bit longer to roll out science. We're trying to get used to the other things on our plates. So today's kind of just to give you an awareness training. So here's where we are. Here's what you can expect as we move forward in this school year and future school years. And what are some of the supports and resources that you can tap into here at the district? So the goal of our district, our learning vision, is E4. It's every student learning in every classroom, in every subject, every day to prepare college, career, and life-ready graduates. So this does include our ELA, our math, our history and social sciences, PE, science, computer science, everything. Today we get a chance to go over some science and how it might integrate with some of the things that you are doing in your classrooms. So our focus today is really going to be on high quality classroom instruction and curriculum, as well as assessment, data analysis, and action. Okay? But ultimately our goal today is to make you feel like you know something about the new science standards without feeling overwhelmed. So if you're getting to that point at any time today that you're feeling overwhelmed, please let us know. That is not our intent. Okay? We do not expect you to go back to your classrooms this afternoon or tomorrow and be like, oh, everything I planned for this school year for science out the window. We just want to give you an idea of what you could possibly do or where you could possibly go for support. I am here if you have any questions about science, but I will have a lot of questions about elementary. And all of you out there know that way better than I do. My 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds can tell me more about elementary than I can. So please take all the information that we're presenting today and use your own expertise with knowing your school site, your students, and your own teaching personalities, and make it work for you. So today, in all of our sessions, our goals are to increase your awareness of NGSS, to provide resources and connections to the current adopted materials, okay, and identify concrete baby steps that we can take to move towards full implementation of NGSS. So I want to be very clear that our goal is not to go 100% full NGSS starting the first day of school. Everyone got that? Do we need to repeat it as a group? Baby steps, that's where we're going, all right? But first I want to do a little bit about background about NGSS for those of you who may not be aware of the timeline and where these standards came from, okay? These standards did come after Common Core. So there are a lot of things that happened with the development of Common Core and the implementation of Common Core throughout the country that the developers of the next generation science standards learned from. And also the Common Core standards were woven into the NGSS. So that way you could hit on some of your ELA or math standards at the same time that you're doing science. So rather than hear me talk for the next couple minutes, I want you to take a moment and find the little booklet that you got when you registered this morning. And the first page inside the booklet, you might see something like this, and I want you to take a quick minute or two to read through that overview. So just because I'm a teacher by nature, I can't stay on the stage at the front of the classroom and talk at you. So I'm sorry if it's hard to see me, but I need to move into my audience. It'll also be a game for you to find where I'm at. So hopefully you got a chance to read through. Now, if we look at the history of NGSS, and this is a brief overview, it says in September of 2013, the California State Board of Ed adopted these standards. What year are we in? 2018, right? It might seem like we are really slow to get moving here in the district. I will say that in working with a lot of districts in the state, we're right about where everybody else is, okay? We know you as elementary teachers have a lot on your plates. After all, you're multiple subject. You teach more than just science. Our secondary teachers, though, they don't have an excuse like that. So we started with them. So even though our state adopted the standards in 2013 and our district adopted them shortly afterwards, our main focus for professional development was with our secondary teachers. So not only do you have myself as a resource, but you have all of the middle school and high school science teachers in your region to reach out to. They've had 3 to 4 years of training on NGSS, and so please utilize them as a resource. I've already warned them that you should be bugging them, so please do. And you'll also see on that timeline that our adoption for elementary instructional materials is a ways out. The state board is supposed to be looking at the list of materials for K-8 starting this week. And once they've approved the materials, then we can look at them to pilot and adopt. However, I think it'd be good for us to realize what these standards are even asking of us and our teachers before we pick the first instructional material out there. Okay? If you want to get started with science, please feel free to reach out because we are more than willing to work with you and get you started down this road, even with the curriculum that you already have. Okay? So what does this all mean for teachers and students? I couldn't figure out how to do this without doing a science lesson. Anyone ever try to do science in a PAC with 500 people? Guess what? We're going to try it today. So all of you, when you registered, should have gotten handed a fortune fish. If you lost yours, you don't get your freebie to take home with you, but please feel free to share with a neighbor who still has theirs. All right, so what the heck is a fortune fish? We're going to find out today. Okay, so some of you already started. But for those of you who are rule followers, here's what I'd like you to do. And we're going to do this activity pretty quickly, okay? So I know it's like first thing in the morning, we just started working again, we're still kind of on summer vacation mode, but I'm going to ask you to do some thinking this morning and thinking fast. So what you're going to do is you're going to remove the fish from the package when I tell you to. Yeah, put them back. You're going to open your hand and lay it flat on your palm. And I want you to think, what do you notice? And as you make some observations, I want you to record them in your little science notebook. There should be a spot in there that says, I notice in the box. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do this. Go ahead and get started. All right, and 3, 2, 1, eyes on me, if you can find me. Okay, here's the challenge. You still have the materials in your hand, but I'm going to ask you to pay attention. Okay. All right, so can I have one person in this row tell me one thing you noticed? It moved. It curls up. Okay, someone in this row, tell me something else that you noticed. It fell off her hand. How many of you would agree with those observations? Did your fish do the same thing that your neighbor's fish did? Really? Sometimes, okay. Well, that's because not all of your fortunes are the same. So now that you've made some observations, I want you to think, does that spur any questions that you might have about this fish? So take about 60 seconds to quietly, independently write down some questions in your I wonder box. This was the quietest writing time ever. All right, since you're so eager to talk and share, I'm going to ask somebody over here in this row, would someone like to share one of their wonderings you had?
What makes the fish move?
What makes the fish move? Anyone have a similar question? Okay, let's see. One of your questions.
That was basically what I got too. I wonder what makes it do that.
Someone have a different question? Oh.
How would it react out in the sunshine?
How would it react in the sunshine? Let's do one more question. Let's see.
Did body heat have anything to do with this?
Body heat. How many of you had way more questions than the ones that were shared? How many of you could only come up with like one question? That was it. Okay. Guess what? Our students are full of questions and are eager to figure out the answers. How many of you ever had that student who asked, when do I ever need to know this? Why are we learning this? In this case, we're learning it because you wanted to know these answers. Why did it move? Does the sun have anything? Will the sun do anything? Does body heat have anything to do with it? These are all coming from the learners. They've provided their own why. You just provided the opportunity. Okay? So I was thinking as a teacher, like, I need this lesson to go a certain direction. I can't just go crazy and explore everything. So I was thinking in my head what would be kind of an obvious question that a lot of you might have based on this experience. And I came up with, why does the fish curl up and move on its own when placed on the palm of your hand? But we want our students to try to come up with possible reasons why, right? So right now, I don't want you just to come up with one possible reason why your fish moved. I want you to come up with two. And what I want to emphasize is I don't expect you to have the right answer. I just want you to think, based on what you observed, what could be two reasons why your fish did what it did. And for this, you can work with your elbow partners. Go. So as I was walking around my small little classroom here, I heard some possibilities. One possibility I heard was an air current, or like you're under the vent, or someone coughed next to you, right? Another one I heard, which was in one of the questions as well, maybe it's something with your body heat. Okay, I see some nods. Another one, and granted this is an exaggerated photo, hopefully none of you have this right now. I'll be honest, I kind of do, so it could be the moisture on your hands, or your sweat, right? Or maybe it has something to do with that crazy balloon static electricity thing that we don't quite know why it does it, but we all do it, right? How many of you came up with one or more of these possible scenarios? These are common responses. And guess what? When you do them with students, what you think might be their common explanation is not, because our kids are super creative. And they come up with some things that we would think are completely off the wall, but are completely plausible. And there are probably 10 other kids in your class who thought the exact same thing, just didn't want to say it. That's okay. Because what we need to do now is in science, it's not just good enough to have a possible explanation, a hypothesis, right? We need to prove which is the best answer, or find evidence to get rid of some of the ones that don't actually work. We need to collect evidence to support a good argument. So how do we do that? Well, let's think about how we could test these things. So based on the two explanations that you came up with, whether it was body heat or maybe it was sweaty palms, think about if that was your explanation, is there something that you could do in your classroom to prove whether or not that is actually what causes your fish to move? And I'll push you a little farther. Think about something simple where you don't have to have fancy lab equipment or a ton of extra materials that you'd have to buy. All right, this one's a little more challenging. So work with your neighbors. What are ways to test your explanations? All right, so lots of creative ideas. So let's think about this. If we thought that the air made it curl up, what's a way to test this? I was thinking maybe create another air current and see if it does the same thing. Probably not like a fan like this, because it would just blow it away, right? But the same idea, or maybe just have students blow on it, right? If you thought body heat, well, maybe I have a hand warmer from my last trip to Tahoe available, and we could just stick the fish on a hand warmer. See if it does that, right? If I thought maybe it was sweaty palms or the moisture from our hands, maybe I have a damp sponge or damp paper towel we could put it on. And if it's static electricity, well, let's rub some balloons on our head and put the fish on our head, or try to put the fish on the balloon, see if it does the same thing. Now, doing these experiments provide more observations and evidence for your students. Whether or not these exact experiments will eliminate some of the possible explanations, we don't know until we try, right? And we could repeat these experiments multiple times because they're pretty simple setups, right? Just because you put it on the hand warmer once and it curls up doesn't mean it will always curl up on a hand warmer. Well, let's get another fish, get another hand warmer and try it again, or wait, 5 minutes and try it. And as your students collect evidence, they can support their argument a little better. Science is all about arguing and finding enough evidence to prove your case. It's not about who can memorize the answer and share it with the class, right? So this was like a mini activity, okay, that we did in this huge group. Pretty quickly. And I could go a lot further if I were in a classroom with my students. Maybe we do some readings on each of those types of things about temperature or about moisture, or maybe it has to do with the material the fish is made of. Like if we trace that fish on construction paper and did the same thing, would it do that? Okay. We could go a lot of different directions with this, and it's all about getting students to think a little differently about what it is we're presenting in front of them. And to get them to start questioning everything and trying to figure out the answers for themselves, right? So in addition to that little blurb that I just gave you, I want you to think with a partner, how does this compare with what we might have grown up as a traditional science lesson, or how we might be teaching science right now? So go ahead and have your elbow partner chat. So for some of you, what we just did might be drastically different than what you're used to. And for others of you, it's very similar. When I first started teaching this way, I was like, wow, this is totally different than anything. And it was hard to change. Well, my son, who's going to go into first grade, for him and his teachers, it wasn't eye-opening. It's like, no, this is how our kids learn before they can read and write. To me, I didn't realize that, because as a middle school teachers, I only got those students who were used to tell me where in the book I can find it, or just tell me the answer so I can regurgitate it on the test, right? And so we're not saying that, oh, the old way we did science is horrible, don't do it, change, right? It just depends on how you've been approaching science and what are some things that we could do to kind of increase the rigor in our classrooms and the critical thinking. The basis of these standards is from this quote. Science is not just a body of knowledge that reflects current understanding of the world. It is also a set of practices used to establish, extend, and refine that knowledge. Both elements, knowledge and practice, are essential. So if we think about our former standards, our 98 science content standards, all of them started with the phrase, students will know. And if we compare that to what this quote is saying from the National Research Council, it's eliminating half of what we consider what is science, the practice, the doing, right? We want students not to just list the steps of the scientific method. We want them to actually do science the way that science is done by scientists. And all of us are scientists in our own way. And so what are these standards anyways, right? We've been doing an activity, you got a whole packet of a whole bunch of words and boxes on it. It might be nice to know how to read them and figure out what the heck that means for teaching, right? So you did get a packet when you walked in. There were different color packets for different grade levels. Those are your grade level standards for science. We gave you a printout. Because it's a little easier to reference that way. They are available online. And you can also purchase the book of standards, but it's about this thick. Okay, so we try to give you just what you need. One thing to note to make sure you have the right packet is at the top of a standards page, which might look like this, it might say something like KPS2. That first letter or number represents the grade level. So K would be kinder, one is a first grade. The weird one comes with sixth grade. Because sixth grade is actually considered part of the middle school band. And so your standards will not start with a 6. Instead, sixth grade in our school district, sorry, wrong slide. Sixth grade in our district are part of the middle school earth and space sciences. So your standards at the top will say MS for middle school, and then ESS for earth and space sciences. Okay. So some of you have seen these documents before, some haven't. So what I'd like you to do is quietly go read over one of the pages. And I don't want you to read for detail. I just want you to see what is in each of those boxes. Okay. All right, so you've all looked at it super in detail and made it past the first box, right? You could sit here and read through these pages in detail the rest of today, and at the end of the day, wonder what you just read. I have been looking at these standards for the last 5 years since they were adopted, and I still have to go back and refresh what is all the information contained in this document. And every time I look at it, I see something that I missed the first time or the last time that I then tweak what I'm doing so that way I can make sure I'm covering the standards completely. Now, one thing that's confusing about the way these standards are written, people say, make sure you're teaching to the standards. What's the standard on the page? If you ask the writers of the Next Generation Science Standards, the whole document are the standards. And the reason they say that is because if you only focus on that top box, you're really not getting to the heart of what it's all about. The boxes beneath it support it and help explain what that top box is saying, but you really need to read into it. So it'll take a little bit of time to digest what all these things are saying. So remember, today's an overview. As you start jumping into teaching the NGSS, you'll have questions. Remember who you can contact to get those questions answered. Okay? I am one of those people. But I'm going to quickly go over what's in each of the box. You have a little blank note, kind of graphic organizer on the back of your science notebook if you want to jot down any of these notes. By the way, all of the presentations you see today will be available on that website link on the front of your science notebook. I would say at the end of today, but let's go with it by the end of the week. Okay? And if you don't see them on that website, email me to remind me to get it done. So at the top, those are what we call the performance expectations. On this page, there are 2 different ones. On yours, you might have 1, you might have 6. There is no set number per document or per grade level. They vary. These are what the student is expected to be able to know and do by the end of a grade span. Okay? Not necessarily by the end of that lesson or by the end of that unit, which I'll explain a little bit more on the next couple slides. Okay? Those statements are developed in a 3-dimensional manner. So when you hear about 3-dimensional learning when it comes to NGSS, this is what we're talking about. NGSS is built on more than just what students should know. There's also those practices, what they should be doing. And then there's a third that talks about how students should think about these things. So the 3 dimensions of NGSS are the content, or the disciplinary core ideas, or DCIs for short, because we all need some more acronyms in our life. Okay. Then you have the blue part of this logo, which are the science and engineering practices, or the SEPs. That's what students should be doing. And then you have the green part, which are the cross-cutting concepts, and those are how students should think. Okay? I think that what students know and what students do are fairly self-explanatory. It's the how students think, which is a little weird. What we mean by cross-cutting concepts are what are those ways of thinking about things that connect the different science disciplines. So how do we connect a life science idea to a physical science idea? But not just that, how do we connect those to math, to ELA, to history, social science? For example, one of our cross-cutting concepts is cause and effect. In science, we want to know what causes that fish to curl, right? In ELA, you might read a book, and you might want to examine what caused that result in the story. Why do we get to that conclusion? Okay. The next part of our document are the 3 boxes that are side by side. We call those the foundation boxes. Those are those 3 dimensions. So starting in the left, those would be your practices, what students do. The orange would be what students should know, or the disciplinary core ideas. And on the right would be our cross-cutting concepts, how students should think. Okay. And they give a little bit more information about those performance expectations on top. So when we look at a performance expectation, those bolded sentences at the top, what you might notice is you could identify one of the practices. So in this case, planning and carrying out investigations is in that first kindergarten PE. Okay. You'll also notice one of the disciplinary core ideas regarding forces and motion. And you would also see one of the cross-cutting concepts, cause and effect, all written into a single statement. That is a pretty heavy loaded statement to cover in a single lesson. Okay. Oftentimes, each of these PEs can be covered in a series of lessons. In addition, and I know your copies are black and white, so you don't see the red, but after the bolded statements in that top box, there are some additional statements. They would normally be in red if you saw a color version. Those are what we call the clarification statement and the assessment boundaries. Those give a little bit more details about how far do you go in teaching. Like, what does it not include? Right? Like, if the performance expectation talks about phases of matter, the clarification statement for your grade might be, we're only talking about solids. And in a later grade, they'll talk about solids and liquids. And in a later grade after that, they might talk about solids, liquids, and gases. And at the very bottom are the connection boxes. Those are connections to other standards in the same grade level, across grade levels, or connections to the Common Core standards in ELA and math. As well as for 6th grade, the reading and writing and literacy standards for technical subjects. So going back to this idea of what science is and how do these standards compare, science is both information, it's a body of knowledge, it's what students should know, but it's also a way to make sense of the world. And what would be great if in the process of making sense of the world, they are figuring out those ideas we want them to, instead of just giving them those ideas and doing a whole bunch of activities to prove that that's right. You also have a little paper inside of your handout that gives kind of a brief overview of the 8 things we ask students to do, our science and engineering practices. Keep in mind that those are the same 8 practices, K-12. So if you are a 3rd grade teacher, it is not your job to get students to master mathematical and computational analysis in 3rd grade. Okay? They're building upon each other. And so for our last thing this morning, before I dismiss you to your breakouts, I want you to think one thing. In our little fish activity that we did, how did we engage in any of those science and engineering practices that are listed in your handout? Okay? And as you go to your breakouts later, I also want you to keep that in your head. What is being asked of you or the student in all of these activities? If you have any questions today, after today, whenever, feel free to email me. I check my email most of the time, yes. And also be sure to check out the website because that is where we're posting all of our science resources and PD information. And thank you.